So let's look at a couple of things. So there's just a couple of things I want to go over today. One is layer blends, okay? So in your layers right here, I'm going to make a layer because you got to have a layer above to do this. Right here is your layer blends, okay? So you got opacity, fill, we'll talk about later. So we got layer blend. So if I go in here, let's talk about two things actually. So let's talk about this gradient tool. Okay, so I'm not even gonna make a shape. I'm just gonna go, I'm gonna get a color. Let me go here, I'll get red. And I'm gonna go to my gradient tool. And if you can see up here in my control bar, it's showing me I have a color and then it goes to transparent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now you could also change this. So I can go up here and I could go black to white, which if I pull this now, I'm going to get black to white. Or this is the foreground and background color. If I pull that, I get that. But I'm going foreground to transparent. Now there's also a bunch of presets in here. So I could come in here and there's all these presets. Okay. Which can come in handy. I never use them, but they could be handy. I usually use this foreground transparent or the black and white. And I'm going to pull this. Now, if I hold it, my shift, it constrains it straight up and down. I'm going to go to there. Okay, so now with your layer blends, so what a layer blend does. And you'd have to look up each one because to be honest with you, I don't keep all the information in my head. It just doesn't work for me. Each layer blend will blend, it's exactly what it says. It will blend that layer above with the layer below in different ways. Like one might eliminate a lot of the gray stuff, and one might do this. But the thing is, the reason I don't try and remember all of them, multiplies when I do know exactly what it does because I use it a lot. Depending on what you have above and what you have below, it sort of changes. Okay. And it only takes a second for me to run through them. So to be honest with you, I never committed it to memory. It doesn't really help me. It might help you. That's fine. So if I go through here now, and you can see I can just drop down to these and see what it gives me. It gives me all these different things. That one's kind of nice. It gives it sort of a sunsetty kind of look. And I just run through them. That one kind of desaturates it, saturates it. So you can see, by the way, you'll start seeing all this stuff when you look at like movie posters and stuff. Like every time I look at things, it's kind of how I see it. Like your brain deconstructs stuff. So a lot of times when I'm looking at stuff out in the world or whatever, I look at it and go, oh, that's an overlay. That's da-da-da. That's he did this, he did that. And you just start deconstructing, which I think is really good to do, actually. It's annoying though, because you can't turn it off after a while. You're like constantly analyzing the world all the time. Okay, so does that make sense?
Yeah.
Real simple adjustment tools, okay? So they live up here under adjustments, okay? And the ones I want to talk about are brightness, contrast, levels, and hue saturation, okay? But we're not going to use them up here because, again, we want to work non-destructively. So down here in your layers palette, you've got right here, this little circle, half circle, is your adjustment layers. So I'm going to go to levels first, okay? And here's my levels. And what happens here is darks, mids, lights. So if I want to affect that, that's where I go and do it. Okay, so there's affecting the darks, and this will blow out the lights. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in the same thing, let's get rid of that. So again, I can make these changes And I do this all the time. You guys probably do it yourself. I do something, I go, wow, it looks really good. And then I look at the next day and I go, what was I thinking? Like it's totally oversaturated. So you want to be able to go back in and change all these things, correct?
Yeah.
So if I come in here and I do this and I go, yeah, this looks fantastic, and it doesn't. Tomorrow I go in here and I go, well, that looks like shit. So then I can click right here, pull it back up and readjust it. I can go right here and click that little circle arrow, and that will just take it back to not being there, just back to 0. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And also, if I do this little eyeball right here will turn it off and on. So I can see what it looked like originally and what it looked like with my changes on it. Okay. And all of them will basically have those controls. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to, okay, brightness contrast kind of is what it is. Here's the brightness, overall brightness. Okay. And for contrast. Okay. Just pushing the contrast. I don't tend to use the contrast as much because it always looks obvious to me for some reason. Let me get rid of that. And then this one, which is hue saturation, which I think is really important. I think overlays are super important, and I think hue saturation is super important. I mean, they're all important, but okay, so this one you got hue. I use this a lot for interesting things. So I might go, okay, I might do this. I do this all the time, especially when I'm digitally painting. I might go, okay, I'm starting to paint, and then I'll go, well, what happens if I just throw a gradient over it? And all of a sudden I might go, well, that's kind of interesting. And it might take the painting in a whole different direction. Okay. Or if I'm doing something like this where I'm manipulating images. Now, another thing I do is if I'm painting or something, I might go into that hue saturation. And right here, this hue thing is basically the color spectrum. So sometimes I'll go, I like that, but is there a better color? So then I'll roll through this and go, well, maybe I wouldn't, but maybe I like that better. Okay. I'll go through and I'll just make sure that I've made the right choice as far as what color I'm picking. Okay. The other part of this is right here is saturation. I can desaturate it or oversaturate it. Okay. And then lightness or darkness. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to want you guys to do. We have to start using the pen tool. Okay, no questions on that, or any questions on that?
No, I'm good.
Oh, you know, I'm going to go over one more, just because you guys seem to be fine. So because we already kind of touched on it, so let's just take this. Make an insanely bad selection. By the way, if you make a selection and then you don't deselect it and you cut and paste it, it'll paste it right back over where you were. Okay, which is real handy to get things lined up. Okay. Right here under edit, transform, or all your transform tools. So scale you can do with Control T. Okay. Rotate, self-explanatory. You don't really need to use that because you can just do that anyway with transform. Skew is a helpful one. So you can pick one edge and skew it. Okay. Distort, what I like about distort is I can just move it however I want. And then perspective, let's go back to the original. Perspective is literally that. It'll just give you perspective depending on where you pull it from. Okay, so if you need to get this building a little bit better into perspective after you moved it somewhere, that would help you do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this one, which I think is interesting, which we just talked about, is warp. Now, if you notice, it gives you this grid up here in my control bar, it's on default. So if you want more control, I can either go to custom or I can go like here. And you can see it gives me way more points. Where the points go? And it has Bezier curves here that you can grab. You want to do all that craziness. Okay. Make sense?
Yeah.
Now, another thing you can start thinking about, like with gradients, with overlays, like if I was gonna, I could go in here. I'm gonna make a copy of this layer. And I could go make another layer. I'll just pick up. Now, here's another thing I do. Like that's a really saturated blue. It doesn't matter because I'm going to adjust it. So I'm going to go overlay, or I'm on a new layer. I've got my gradient, transparent to, or color to transparent. Let's try that. I might need to pull it down a little bit. So let's check. Leave it there for me. Actually, let's do this. And I'm going to use a gradient because I want to show you guys how to do it. We need to know how to fill. So here's your foreground color. Here's your background color. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go edit. And right here, it says fill. Okay. And I'm going to have foreground color. That means this swatch right here. Okay. I'm going to hit OK and it fills it. Okay. And now I'm going to go back to transparent. I'm going to pull the opacity down a little bit. And I can start to get, let's see if we need to desaturate it a little bit. No, that's fine. Maybe the darkness a little. I'm going to try my levels. So I'm going to go to my levels right here. Darken it up a little bit. What I could start to get here is sort of, now I'm going to make this very sloppy, but you'll get the point. And put another layer on here. And then this is going to be screaming, but I'll adjust it. And I can start to subtly light up windows. I could go up here. I'll try it with this. I'll adjust this down. It's going to be screaming again, but you'll see. Oops. I'm going to try and amp this up. Oh, there it is. Too much. Let me take it off this layer. That's the problem. I'm going to grab this. And I could start to light this building. Maybe there's a helipad up there. I could start to light up all this down here. I mean, I could light up all of it, obviously. Now, down here, I might be able to come in here. I don't know if it'll work through the overlay. And go to the tool we talked about yesterday, which is our sponge tool, and tell it to saturate. And I can start to light that up a little bit more in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I could start to build a pretty believable night scene pretty quickly. Okay. Here, I could light this up a little more. All these things that already have light, I could go in and just saturate them up a little bit. Now, when I'm doing things like this, I also might go, well, maybe I'll go here, get my eraser, which we talked about yesterday, get a soft eraser. Really drop the opacity on this. I'm going to go to the blue layer. I'm going to drop it more. Barely even working. And I could pull some of that sunset back out of there. So I still have some sunset, so it's starting to get late afternoon-y kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Is there a way to, so like right now, if you look at your like blue layer, you're permanently like taking that blue away. Is there a way to do it to where like that's not permanent?
Yes. But we'll get into that probably
Okay.
tomorrow or the next day.
Okay.
Yes, there is. There's a really cool way to do that. But we'll do an exercise just on that.
Okay.
Very simple, really easy. But yes, there is. Which will be a really important thing. What I'm talking about right now is just kind of manipulating the image so I get some interesting things out of it.
Yeah.
I could also go here now and maybe grab this. Yeah, maybe here. I'm going to sample. Let me get a brush. I'm going to sample maybe this. Pretty dull, so I might have to, maybe this. That's like pea soup. I'm going to actually sample it here. No, that's probably too big. I'm going to see how this does. I can adjust it. And then maybe make a new layer again. I might have to do this under, I'm not sure. Grab my gradient. See if I can find. I might have to go over with this. Oh, you know, let's go here. Trying to get something that has a little color in it. Let me try something here. I would have to dial back in the more yellowish tones. But I could slightly, so it picked up this warmth in the windows. You guys see that?
Yeah.
Now that's a happy accident, okay? Which is one of the things I like about trying these things, because I get a lot of happy accidents that way, and I kind of like that. It feels like it's picking up a little of this out here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just keep rolling down that. And all I'm using right now is the tools we just talked about. That's all I'm using, okay? Now, does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And the reason I'm giving you this is it's all curves, okay? So you can pick, I would just, and I'll show you what I did. I just did a quick version of it. Here's how you, I'm gonna want you to use the pen tool. Now here's the thing with the pen tool. Here it is right here. Don't go to these other things. You just wanna be in the pen tool. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a shortcut for this convert point tool, which is just giving it a corner tool. And I'll show you that here in a second. So when I make a, okay, so here's the other thing. When you're making a curve, you have to anticipate the curve. And you also need to get pretty close on these things because you're going to find out you think you're pretty, it looks pretty good and it's pretty sloppy. Okay, usually. So usually I get pretty close up on this stuff. And I have to anticipate these curves. So I'm going to start here and then I go, okay, I can probably make it to here. And that's that one. And then I can probably get to here. Now, I might have to go up here. Yeah. And adjust this. See how it's off a little bit right there? You guys see it right there?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go, okay, so here's the two things you got to remember. Either control or command, or either control command or option alt, okay? So I'm doing command. When I hit command, I will get my white arrow tool, which if you guys remember from yesterday, that means I can grab this Bezier curve, but you notice, see how it affects both sides of the curve? See that?
Yeah.
Okay, so, but I don't want to do that, let's say, okay? So then I go, instead of going command and getting the white arrow tool, I go option and I get my corner point tool and it only affects one side. You guys see that?
Yeah.
So then I'm going to drop that down and line it up a little better. This one up here's funky, so I'd have to go. By the way, you can click off of it. It'll deselect it and then I can loop over it and it'll give me just that one point. And then you can see I'd have to adjust that again. Then there's a little bit of a curve there. A little bit of a curve there. Now, sometimes you can do the entire curve in one pass, but sometimes they're too complex and you can't. So this one, I would come down to here, you know, and I would just go through my whole thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then what we want to end up with is a better version of this, okay? Because my selection is not great. It's okay. But what I always do then is I go, let's get rid of this, is I make another layer. Just every time I do some kind of isolated selection, I put a layer under it. I go over here. I go to, and in your swatches here, if you go down here, they have a grayscale, okay? And I pick like a mid-value gray, okay? Not too dark, not too light. Then I go edit, fill, foreground color, because that's this. And what that does is it tells me if I have white fringe or black fringe. You know, if I have fringe, it'll show it on this because this is a mid value. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
you mean by fringe?
Oh, fringe is like, let's do this. Fringe is your enemy. By the way, the other thing is, so when I make this selection, here's the other thing you got to remember here. So I'm going to close this selection just so I have a closed selection. Okay, this is going to be horrible. So now what people think is they go, okay, I got a selection. You don't have a selection. You have what's called a work path. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a work path. It is not a selection because people will try and fill it. And what it's going to do is fill the whole layer. It's not going to conform to that shape the way it will in a selection. Okay. So what you have to do is go down here, or, you know, it's up here. Paths, which I have right here. You go to your paths and you can see it right there. You see it where it says work path?
Yeah.
And if I control or command click the thumbnail, not the word, not the bar, the thumbnail. By the way, clicking on the thumbnail in a lot of things will activate a selection, okay? So remember, clicking on the thumbnail will activate a selection in a lot of different places. Your layers in here, and then we'll talk about other ones later. So I'm going to command click that. And now it activated it as a selection. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So you just got to remember that. Because now if I want to cut it out or whatever, and by the way, notice this is a flat, this is still on background. So look how it didn't punch through and give me transparency. It gave me the background color. You guys see that?
Yeah.
That's what it'll do if it's just a background layer. If I go here, so what you need to do is do that, and then you can go, and then it'll literally cut it out. Okay? So fringe, so let's do this. Actually, let's do this. So let's go put another layer. Fill it with my, whatever you call it. Now, another thing, if I go, well, I want to look at it a little darker, let's say, I could go to my levels. And I could darken up that gray value if I want. That right there is fringe.
Oh, okay.
This right here is fringe. Okay. Now, if I have really minor fringe, this is not minor over here.
Yeah.
Sometimes what I'll do over here, like this kind of fringe here, that's probably a lot too, but I'll just tell you, if I have very little of it, sometimes I'll go to, so again, clicking the thumbnail, if I click the thumbnail in my layers, command click it, I get my thing, and then I can go up here to select, modify, and you have different options here, but I'm going to go contract, which means it's going to pull the selection inwards. And what it's asking me here is how many pixels in I want to go. So I'm going to say 2. So watch this, you'll see it move inward. Did you guys see that?
Mhm.
Very slightly.
Yeah, let me do it a little bigger so you can see it. Modify, because I usually only do it about 2. If I need to do over 2 pixels or something like that, it's probably too much. So let's go contract and let's do 10 so we'll really see it. Now you see it, right?
Yeah.
Now, what I usually do, if I only have a little tiny bit, is I'll go select, modify, contract, and I'll go like, whatever, let's do 3. And then I will go up here to select. And remember, these are under select. We're doing a selection thing, so it's under select. And then I will go inverse. Now watch the selection. It's selecting the object, I'll go inverse. And now it's selected the opposite. You see that? It selected the background.
Mm-hmm.
So then I just go delete. Oops, I'm on the wrong one there. And that a lot of times, see how it eliminated a lot of that right there?
Yeah.
So sometimes that'll work. Now, if you notice, it didn't fix this. Okay. So with something like that, if I do a crappy selection, then I might just come back in here. And I will go. I mean, there's a bunch of ways I can fix these things. That one's not that bad. There's a little kink right there. You see that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sloppy. Look at that little bit of blue from the sky. That's cool. The old blue it's picking up. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what we want to end up with, you know, once you get these things, you know, then you can, that gives you the opportunity to do, I don't know. And then you could drop in a different background. Is it just something I have? Now, I don't want to get too far into this. I'm mostly just concerned about the pen tool. But if I was going to do something like this, and I wouldn't do it like this. Now I'd have to think about the lighting on the building, correct?
Yeah.
So that would become a whole other issue because obviously it couldn't sit there like that. They're clearly in different lighting. But we'll get into that later. What I'm more concerned with is getting a nice clean selection. Okay, the other thing, don't worry about this stuff here. Like this here. You can just go through here and you know, I don't care about the plant. You're not going to get in there and pin tool that plant. I'll show you ways to do that later. Does that make sense?
Okay.
But don't worry about the little branches and all this stuff. I'm just more concerned about getting the buildings and all these curves because you've got to start learning how to. And the main things you got to remember when you're in that pin tool, you don't want to. So you don't want to go, I got to adjust this and I want to go to my corner point tool. So I'm going to go to, like, again, there's that where it's affecting both. And I go to my corner point tool. So I'm going to go up here and go down to my corner. You don't want to do that. You just want to go, now I go option. There's that one. Or if I need to affect both, then it's this one. Now it's locked in there because it turned it into a corner point. This one's still doing it. Okay. that make sense? So the only thing you gotta remember when you're in the pin tool, you want the white arrow tool to affect both sides, Command. You want the corner point tool to affect one side, Option or Alt. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All I want tomorrow is this building isolated.